to order the Utility Financial Oversight Committee. Kathy, could we take a roll call, please?
Chairperson Engelmann.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Bennett.
Here.
Member Bowling.
Here.
Member Scott. Here. Member Spell.
Here.
Quorum is present.
All right, we have a quorum. Did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? And if there are no corrections, I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
So moved.
All right,
Second.
Mr. Bowling moved and
Second.
Mr. Bennett seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous.
I'll abstain, having not been here.
Thank you. Did you catch that, Kathy? All right, thank you. All right, before we get started, let me say that some guests have been invited to come up today to take part in portions of our agenda, and at this point they're not. Oh, let me first call for public comment. I forget it when there's no public, so so not seeing any. Let me say that we've invited some people to come up to take part in discussions on portions of the agenda. They're not here. It's my plan that if and when they show up, if we're in the middle of the budget or something, we may stop and go to their portion of the agenda so they don't have to sit through the budget. As fascinating as it may be, we want to be efficient with their time and sensitive to that. So, seeing that, let's move ahead to the agenda as presented and go on with the first item, which would be the financial update. Pam?
Pam Ganger, Finance. So I just want to point out to start off with that we're in the very preliminary stages of preparing our fiscal year 18 financial statements in CAFR. So that is why you have budget preparation worksheets and not actual financial statements, because they're nowhere near ready to be presented in that format. And I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of our timeline for closing out the year. Our fiscal year 18 transactions will continue to post until we close the month of August, which will not be until about September 15th or so, the middle of September. At that point, then we'll have about 1 month to prepare our closing entries for the year and start preparing our CAFR for the annual audit. So because the numbers are so preliminary, I wasn't planning to review them in great detail at this point, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the fiscal year 18 documentation.
Mike Spell?
Yes, Pam, what is the actual last date of transactions on these? Do you know? When was the last posting date for these?
Oh, for these statements was, they were prepared on August 3rd. The last posting would have been August 2nd.
Okay, so we're up through August 2nd.
Yes.
Okay. One of the other questions I had in looking at year-to-date actuals to estimates, how do you adjust the estimates, or sometimes they equal the budget, sometimes they're less than the year-to-date? So it kind of makes it difficult to go through a budget document when there's not consistency that I'm seeing here. How do they come up with the estimates for 2018 then?
Okay, sure. So the estimated fiscal year 2018 column is sort of our best guess of what the end of the year is going to look at the time that we are preparing the next year's budget. So it kind of gives us some guidelines on what we can, basically how to prepare our 2019 budget, our next year budget. And so it's really just sort of a best guess of what we can expect to see. So it's prepared based on projections of expenses and revenues based upon the data that we have through that point in the year, which is usually February and March when we're preparing that.
So you basically do that estimate like one time. It's not an ongoing update to what you think your year end will be then?
That is correct.
Bruce?
Pam, I'm sure that this has been explained, but I'm not sure I understand without another explanation. On page 13, near the top, we have a number of entries on the in the first group of entries for the internal service charges. And does the storm drainage fund pay internal service charges to sewer and water, or is that just a remnant that goes back a ways? I see it occurred in 2016, but it doesn't occur going forward.
All of the internal service charges are charges from the internal service funds. So that would be the fleet radio fund or the fleet vehicles. That would be the insurance fund, for example. So it's those funds' revenues and the storm drain or sewer or water funds expense. Does that kind of answer the question?
Well, in the water and sewer internal service charges, they don't pay internal service charges to each other. And here we have a line item for internal service charge on sewer, internal service charge on water. I understand insurance, general, fleet, and radios, but I didn't understand between the sewer and water funds and the storm drain fund.
And off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that, but as you can see, it only occurred in fiscal year 16 and 17, and it's not moving forward. So off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly why we would have had those charges. I can check into that if you would like.
It's not worth it. Thank you.
Actually, I think I recall something about the floods, and last time we went over the budget and so forth, that when we had all that flooding and the rain last year, that water and sewer, because they had such a small amount, stormwater had such a small amount of money, that there was usage in going back and forth in the water sewer fund.
Yeah, when we have an event like that, not obviously stormwater responds, but everybody from Public Works responds with the idea that then stormwater has to reimburse those other funds, those time and material, but this isn't the accounts that would come out of. So I'm as well as Pam, I'm at a loss. It's that $1,000 and $1,200, and I'm sure at one point we had an explanation, but I don't remember what it was either. So it's just not on my radar. But it wouldn't be for that event.
I tried. Mike, Spell?
Yeah, and then I got one last question on water. It was on page 23. Water delinquencies, the budget was zero. We've collected $639,000. What happened there?
So those funds we collect through the water fund every single year, and they are transferred out. I believe it's to the general fund. Isn't that right,
Yeah.
Darren? Yeah. So that's why you see zeros in all the other years. It's the way that we've been doing it for years and years, but I don't have a good explanation for why exactly we handle it this way.
So would there be a corresponding expenditure line there in this account? Because it seems to me you've got a liability then if this is going to the general fund.
Hi, Nancy Paulson, City Manager, ex-CFO, so I just happened to walk in at the right time. So what that is, those are charges, aren't they like kind of considered franchise fees? And so we weren't able to set up the water bills to have it go directly to the general fund. And so it goes initially to the water fund, and then we just journal entry the revenue out of the water fund into the general fund. So there's not it should be going directly to the general fund to begin with, but it's in the programming of the water bills.
Okay, then, so our cash would basically be overstated for the use of this fund by that amount because we don't have an offsetting expenditure line, correct?
Right, so when we do the journal entry, we take it out of the revenue, we take it out of the cash in the water fund, and we move it over to the general fund and
That'd
increase
be
the
year-end,
cash.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we do it, a few times throughout the year, but usually we just let it accumulate.
Anybody else have any questions?
I do.
Yes, Randy?
We've got close to 25 pages of numbers and columns. Pam and Darren, any general observations based on those 25 pages?
Generally speaking, and I was going to touch on this next. In your packet, you have the cash balances that I provided, and these are unaudited cash balances for fiscal year 2018 as of June 30. And obviously the audited balances for fiscal year 2017. And so based on all the numbers that you have in your packet for fiscal year 18, including the cash balances, you'll note what's missing are the financial policies. So the overriding theme that I wanted to just kind of present here is that that we are looking like we're going to meet our financial policies okay. So just in terms of, all of the expenses, all the revenues coming in are kind of on par with what we expected. And it's looking like we'll be looking fine for our financial policies with the exception of perhaps the water fund on the debt to equity ratio, which, as you know, because of the new debt that we recently took on, our debt to equity ratio in the water fund will be skewed. But aside from that, we should be looking pretty good.
Thank you. So in general, the direction is good.
Yes.
So we as a department, we look into, we get into more detail. So monthly, we'll go through the water division and we go line item by line item and get an update at the end of the month in terms of where we are target-wise, what was budgeted, what we spent, and just manage it on a month-to-month basis. So we're tracking our line items. I'll just tell you our train of thought is we know that some are going to come in a little over and we know some are going to come in a little under. It's that little that we work with and then the summation at the bottom to make sure that we're within budget, when it's all out there. As you know, we've explained the budget process. Some of these are just their estimates based off of other things and things come up during the year. But in terms of what you have before us, you won't see any big anomalies, anything really out of whack that would need further explanation. You're going to see a little right on track, a little above, and a little below, which is, to me, pretty good government accounting and budgeting, if you can do that. But just as a department, that's how we manage it throughout the year going forward. And if, for instance, we're halfway through the fiscal year and we see one line item, way at the top, like we've spent everything, immediately we start questioning what are we going to do for the next 6 months? What happened here? And try and get an answer for that. A lot of times it's purchasing that we do, and we'll buy it for the whole year on month 3. So that line item is, it's at the max, but we know we're not going to purchase any more of that for the next 9 months. So it's an acceptable answer. So we'll do that periodically throughout the budget year to make sure that those are tracking. And there's nothing here that I felt needed further in-depth explanation in terms of something being really out of whack unless something came to your attention that you'd like an explanation on.
Thank you.
And just a reminder as well, I'm sorry if I interrupted you, that these statements are very preliminary, so there still would be lots of adjustments coming through for another month, and then after that, we'll be making our year-end adjustments, journal entries, before you see the actual financial statements, and then you'll have, the solid picture of what the year looked like. But these statements are so preliminary that that's why we presented with, a lot of detail, just so that you can see, line by line, how things look.
Do we have two separate accounts in sewer? Is one operations and one the plant, or what are the two different accounts we're seeing here?
It's one, I don't know how to explain it. It's one overall account, but collections is separate from treatment.
Okay.
But it's, the
Yeah.
overall is one wastewater account.
Okay, but they're presented here, it looks like,
Yes.
in two separate, okay. And then another question, on page 27, which is the water, back to one of my favorite subjects, the internal service charges, I am really pleased to see the budget for the general fund going down in the projections for tentative estimated 2018, going down in fiscal year 2019 and the final 2019. And I guess I'm hoping that's a long-term trend, but I guess the question is, can you explain to me what's going on with that actual in 2016 to the final in 2019 in terms of the internal service charges? I don't know, Pam, do you want me to give you a line item number, or do you have it?
No, I have it.
Okay.
And when it comes to the internal service charges with the general fund, that's all based on our cost allocation plan. And, we hire a consultant every year, and she comes in and helps us analyze all the numbers and put together our cost allocation plan. And that's how those numbers are derived. So I'm not sure if that helps you at all, Annie, to get an idea of, of how that number is derived.
Okay, because in the sewer, it didn't go down by half, but in the water, it did. And I'd love to see it go down even more, because I hate to see our enterprise funds paying to the internal service charges.
I think maybe our city manager might have a comment or two.
Thank you, Nancy.
So glad that I came to the meeting. So it's based on what projects are going on in the fund. So a few years ago in the water fund, they were doing the transmission line, I think it was called. Darren will know the technical term. So that's why, it's now gone down, and a lot of the engineers and the other employees that are, allocated, well, I guess that's
They would be project.
some of them are direct costs, but who would be part of the cost? But it would be what projects you're working on, right? Okay.
Right. So a portion, for instance, like my position is paid for out of the general fund, and I'm divided up at the end of the year in terms of what I worked on throughout that year. So when the majority of my time in a year is spent on water, a larger portion of my salary is going to be paid for out of that charge. As well, if the DA's office in a given year we're using them more to help us with water projects, then that allocation has to go up and adjust. So the idea is you project it, you predict it, and then at the end of the year you go back and balance it and see what actually happens. So in terms of trends, I think it's great as to where this is going. But depending on what happens with the water fund and the amount of time that general fund staff are working on water project, that's how that's going to fluctuate. So it's, to answer your question, it's direct. It's not a guess number. It's direct time that we're spending towards that fund that it gets charged.
It's direct time, but it's also, just so you know, there's a 1-year lag time too. So the internal service charges for fiscal year 19 were actually based off of fiscal year 2017 numbers for labor and projects and time to project it out.
Now, those allocations are essentially automatic based on timesheet entries, or do you have to go back at the end of the year and allocate your time? In other words, is it a big accounting exercise to allocate that, or is it simply based on the timesheets that go in on a regular basis?
When you guys give the information on the cost allocation plan, is that based off your timesheets?
Most of it.
Okay.
For working, this is going to sound bad on my part, but working level engineers, it's very specific. Every day they fill out a timesheet hour by hour by hour. I, on the other hand, I don't do that. But in kind of averages in terms of what I spend my time on, that's how it's based. So some are specific to a timesheet, and some at maybe a higher level position, managerial position, it's more on an average level. So.
Yeah, so since we have the lag, and we're going to have, what's it, $8 million bond we're going to float for the water? 7. So we're going to have more activity and more direct. So I think what you're going to see is maybe in 2 years, you're going to see a bigger cost allocation again. Correct?
That's right, for the water fund, yes.
And each year when we're doing the next plan, we also true up the prior allocation plan. So they actually go in and, because, when we're initially doing it, it's an estimate. So then they'll go in and put their actual time, and then we'll adjust the cost allocation plan.
All right, now remember last year we got money back on
Yeah.
a number of things when they did the true up, so that's the part I liked. Okay, is there any other questions on the budget? All right, then Darren, let's move ahead to the next item, which has to do with our bond issue and the east-west line and so forth. I presume the committee's aware that the recommendation we made to the board on the bond and the east-west line has gone, it's just about gone through, hasn't it, Pam, or?
Yes, it has. So the refinancing of the $10 million bond was completed last week, and they are moving forward, looking into the options and working through the process for the next step, which is the $7 million water bonds for January, February timeline to be issued.
Darren, did you want to, one of my concerns was if we're going to be putting more emphasis on the east-west line, how will that impact other projects?
Yeah, so in the budget that you have before us, the east-west is not in there yet. So none of these numbers reflect that because it hasn't happened. It's going through that process. So during this budget year, Finance will adjust the budget to show the big influx of bond money that goes into the fund, as well as the payments starting to go out. But what you have here today doesn't show that because we're still too early in the process. But if you remember when I brought it before you, the bond for the east-west is a $7 million bond, but we had put in our capital for water, we had put $1 million towards the east-west plan project. So the 7 plus the 1 equals the 8, which is what we anticipate the project to be. So in terms of funding within the water, I don't anticipate any changes having to move any money around for that project because I had $1 million slotted there. We're getting 7 from the bond. 7 plus 1 is 8, which is what we expect the project to cost. So at this point, unless something changes, an unknown, I don't have to move any money around within the fund.
Right, and that project was included in the 5-year capital plan. So it was projected out as one of the top priority projects to work on in the next year or two. But obviously that was contingent upon any funding. So that all of that happened after the budget process occurred, so there was no way to fit it into the budget. But it will be handled as we move along through the augmentation process in the coming year, so.
Bruce?
Yeah, just an observation. It's great to see that east-west line getting funded and moving ahead, but I think we need to remember that we're still way behind on our capital needs. And so hopefully, this committee can be helpful as we look at budgets for next year and the potential that there may be the possibility of some supplemental capital monies from the city as a whole. I think we need to be thinking about what priorities might be. Obviously, there's a list of priorities, but I would really like to see the water fund, the water enterprise fund, be able to capture whatever capital monies we can to help reduce the backlog, if you will, of delayed and deferred capital projects.
Any other comments?
Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm on the stormwater budget where we're showing the tentative to the final approved. What happened with the beginning cash? That's different than what we had seen for our tentative approval. The form we had was $478,105 for your beginning cash, and you're showing $542,267.
So just for the record, we've now moved on to item 2B.
Right.
Okay.
And you were asking about the stormwater drainage fund?
Yes. When we recommended the budget to the supervisors, ending cash for 18 was $478,105. This document on page 35 shows cash as $542,267.
Right, so what happened with that was that after our UFOC meeting, we, I don't know if you recall the timing with the SRF 2014 loan that we had with the state. Some of those monies were reallocated between sewer and stormwater. So when the payments, and that was in the current year here, so fiscal year 2018, when the payments came in and the loan payment schedule was revised, the bond payments went down for the stormwater fund. And that obviously affected our year-end cash amount, and then it affects the cash moving forward into 2019. So that's where you see the change.
That's the discrepancy.
Yes.
You ended up with more cash than what we
Exactly.
saw for
Because the payment went down. That's correct. So should I continue, or would you like to go through your questions first, or should I just go through some of the?
That's it. I thought when we went
Okay.
to the budget, I thought we were addressing too.
So, Mike, do you have more questions?
No, I do not.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead, Pam?
Okay, so I'll proceed then. So, starting with the stormwater drainage fund, and I'm just going to go through the changes between what you saw at the March UFOC meeting, which was presenting our tentative budget at that time, to what was final and filed with the state of Nevada. And so the major changes with each of the funds, stormwater drainage, the sewer fund, and the water fund, you'll notice, and I'll go through each of them separately, that there were increased salaries and wages and employee benefits with each fund. And all of that has to do with the Public Works reorganization, which was approved by the Board of Supervisors, which occurred after our UFOC meeting. So that's why we have those big changes, which we normally would not have. We just have little tweaks here and there, but because that reorg was approved by the board after our UFOC meeting. That's why we have these big changes between the tentative approved and the final approved for salaries and benefits. So with stormwater, what that came to was an increase in salaries and wages of $6,400 approximately, and employee benefits of $3,000 approximately, so in total $9,400. We just discussed the decrease to the 2014 SRF loan principal and interest payments, so those went down, and you saw a decrease of $42,000 in principal and $22,000 in interest. And so those are really all the changes in the stormwater fund. Do you have any questions anymore with that? Okay. So then I'll move on to the sewer fund. With the sewer fund, we had, once again, related to the Public Works reorganization, we had an increase in salaries and wages of $46,500 and an increase in employee benefits of $17,300, again, due to the reorg. And then in services and supplies, there was an increase of $13,700 related to the increased costs in internal service charges for radios. So that got spread across all the funds which use the radios through the city. So each of the funds, stormwater didn't have those, but sewer and water both have that. And those are the only changes to the sewer fund budget. Are there any questions on that? Okay, then
Just real quick, on the radios and things, is some of that used, do we provide information that, say, the sheriff's department uses part of that or something? So are they paying us a fee for that?
So the, throughout the city, there's radios, and we have a radio inventory, and that is handled through one of our internal service funds, and they aggregate the costs for that fund to maintain those radios and buy and replace new radios, and the radio console and all of that equipment, and all those costs get aggregated, and then they're split up like all the other internal service funds charged to each of the funds. So it's always a charge from that internal service fund to the other funds.
I just want to see if we're getting some cost allocation back.
Yes, so for instance, the sheriff's office, they have the most radios, so they are being charged the most for their internal service charge. They're being charged the most. That money comes back to the radio fund. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving on to the water fund then. In the water fund, you'll see the biggest jump related to the Public Works reorganization, and that's because we have a new water manager, as you met Eddie today. So our salaries and wages throughout the reorg for the water fund, the effect of that was $85,900, and in employee benefits was $37,700. And then lastly, in supplies and services, again, we have the increased costs in the internal service charges for the radios of $14,700. So that's all the changes in each of the funds between what you saw in March to what we have today for fiscal year 19. I'm happy to take any other questions if you have them.
Nice job, Pam. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, then let's move ahead to item 2C. On the, excuse me, I guess, is that what we want? Yeah.
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 Chance for the public to weigh in.
Right. So we haven't had anybody show up that was invited. Nancy, our city manager, is our audience, and Nancy Paulson. we ignore anybody from the press, so they don't count. So we don't have much in the way of public comment on this item. Let me clarify that I actually, while it's marked for possible strategy, possible action,
Thank you.
yeah, I really don't plan on taking any, I doubt there will be any motions. I don't really plan on taking any action on this, but I think we really need to discuss this and look at this hard. So, Darren, you want to lead off on that?
I would be happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. Darren Schultz for the record, Public Works. I was going to, if you'll excuse me, I was going to talk, and I will continue staff update during the manager's report, which is the next item. But because I may ask our new water utility manager to help out with this, I'd like to introduce him at this time.
Please do.
So this is Eddie Qualieri, and he's our Carson City's water utility manager. He's been with us for about 4 weeks, a month now. Yeah, it's going fast. So some of the information provided here today, Eddie helped develop. I'm very, very pleased to have Eddie here. I can tell you that I do go home now with a little less weight on my shoulders, and it's a positive thing. So I'm standing taller. A lot more weight is being shifted onto Eddie's shoulders. He is so much smarter than I am that it really makes me feel dumb. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing. No pressure. So I think it's prudent, Madam Chair, that we do have this update here. It'll give you a background as to how we got here, where we are, and then what the future holds. So we'll. So this first slide is what was adopted both by this committee as well as the Board of Supervisors 3 years ago. You'll remember the presentation that was given in terms of what connection fees pay for, and then the options of how do we get to the total amount that we need to be charging. There was a number of discussions. I was looking back at some of the minutes from the different meetings. This was rehashed a number of times in terms of mostly not so much about what the total fee should be at the end, but more about how quickly we should get to that fee. In the end, it was decided that it would start July 1st of 2016 and would be a 5-year phase-in. So you'll note that we just had our 3rd year uptick, which was July 1 of this year. That put us in, it's on this slide, it's shown as year 4 because year 1 was where we were at the time without the initial start. So we're currently in year 4, and everything remaining the same, we would have 2 more years of phase-in. This is the same slide except for sewer, the wastewater side of things. The total amount that's going to be charged at the end of the phase-in is higher than water. That's based off of the capital and the need of expansion. And again, we are currently in year 4. We just did that a month ago, and everything remaining the same, we would have 2 more connection fee increases July 1 over the next 2 years. This is what was part of our presentation that we did 3 years ago, and it was just an idea of what our surrounding municipalities are charging for connection fees. The chair asked, and rightfully so, is could we get an update on this? And so this is where Eddie really helped out in terms of the new slides, the late material that was put out yesterday, and the new slides that you have for water, one's for water, one's for wastewater, but it's as current information as we would have it this week tells you where we have. To note, we included Carson City, what we're currently charging as of July 1 of 2018, and then Carson City, what we will be charging as of July 1, 2020, when it's fully phased in. So you have you have those two columns on both graphs, and then the other columns represent the other agencies around us. When we did the presentation 3 years ago, we just included this small sampling, or our consultant included this small sampling of local water purveyors, but our water, Eddie went out and was able to grab other a better example of other surrounding agencies and what their charges are. So if you look at the slide that was handed out as late material, there's much more other municipalities shown. One thing that we would like to correct on that slide is there's a number of them, there's an asterisk with the note that water right dedication included in connection fee only for, and then we have listed there Carson City, Gardnerville Ranchos, and Indian Hills GID. And we would like to make a correction there that the water rights on this graph are only included in Carson City. So any other of these municipalities, when you have a connection fee, you also have to bring or buy water rights. So the fee would go up depending on how much that right that you have to buy or that you have in your person. So Bruce could probably talk to this better than I could, but those rights vary around the region, and I would estimate for a residential customer, it could be anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 additional in terms of a water right that would have to be brought to the table to the municipality. We did not include specifically what those water rights would be in this graph because it's very subjective. But in terms of the connection fee, these are these are the new numbers.
Okay, Bruce, do you want to speak to that, to the water right situation?
I really don't have much to add to what Darren has indicated, that it varies by location. Some places have water that you can pay for as part of your connection fee, such as Minden. Others, and Minden as well, will allow you to bring water to the table, which you may purchase for a little bit less, or you may already have it. So it does become pretty subjective, but the bottom line is that Carson City is still a tremendous bargain because the water right value is included in what somebody's paying today and as it goes up the next 2 years. So if you were to add water rights cost to these, they would be somewhat subjective, but they would all be quite a bit higher.
And I see that we're still lower, even after the 5 years, we're still lower than the surrounding areas. So let me ask a question. We see people they take out their building permits and they pay for their water hookup fees and their sewer hookup fees at the same time, right, Darren? So, and then sometimes they don't build. Either they don't have the financing or they have trouble finding labor or something else. So then they come back before the Board of Supervisors after about 18 months, I think it is, 2 years maybe, and ask for an extension. At that time, and the board usually grants those extensions, at that time, do they pay the difference between what they initially paid for their water fee, their water hookup fee, and their sewer fee to what it was at that time?
They do not. They pay whenever that initial permit was pulled, they are charged the fee at that time, and whether they start building on day one or they start building a year later. Now, a typical permit will be generally 12 months long, but whether it's the next day or it's 12 months later or there's an extension, they pay that fee that when their initial permit was pulled. That's the water fee that they paid. I did check with Development Services in terms of, are they seeing anything unique throughout the year where people might be, and they said that there is generally a slight uptick in June in terms of people pulling permits, but in terms of a range, they're guessing because you would never know. Somebody's not going to tell you this, but in terms of range, they thought it would be less than 10 of people that are coming in June specifically to get a lower fee than what they would have to pay in July. Now, in terms of how long it takes before they build, right now, they said that on the residential side, that they don't see anybody, not anybody, but a very, very, very small number of people that are pulling residential permits and not building immediately. And I think it's probably a sign of the times. But in terms of commercial or what you're discussing, where they pull a permit, they wait, they file for an extension, ultimately they have to go to the Board of Supervisors if they want another extension. That does happen certainly occasionally, yes.
I guess we've seen it with apartments, but I know we've seen it with some of these larger subdivisions of single-family homes, too.
Yes, so the big subdivisions, they're not pulling the permits at that point. That's just at a mapping level, and they're getting everything established, but no permits have been pulled. So for instance, some of the approvals that have recently been done, whether it's a variance or getting the land ready to develop, no permits have been pulled on any of those. So those extensions don't have anything to do with this. It's not until they pull a building permit for an individual lot that we assess this charge.
I was just going to add what Darren had said, is that I think the ones that you're referring to, some of the larger developments that we're asking for modifications to the development agreement, they've never paid the hookup fee. So they would still be in the mix of paying the hookup fee in place at the time that they pull the building permit.
Thank you. All right. Are there any more comments or discussion? Because I think, at some point, we're going to have to look at this. We're getting close to the 5-year mark. What happens then? Bruce?
Yeah, just as I recall, several years ago when we talked about the increase in fees, the connection fees, some of us would like to have had it come in a little bit quicker. But my recollection is that in conjunction with the builders, in exchange for their support of the increase in fees, we agreed to a 5-year phase-in instead of a 3-year phase-in. And I think we're in year 3 or close to year 4 of that phase-in, and I think it seems to be working okay. I wish it were going faster, but I think it's kind of what we had recommended and what the board approved. So, although I think, as the chair just indicated, we need to be looking ahead, it seems to me that the current schedule and the current board approval aren't particularly broken, and it appears from what you said, Darren, that there doesn't seem to be a lot of people pulling permits and not utilizing them in order to perhaps be able to build next year or the year after, but having saved a few $100s on a permit this year. I think the numbers probably aren't big enough to make that worthwhile, but it appears to me that we're in a position where we probably should be looking ahead, but I don't think there's any need to, I don't have any appetite to do any tweaking or any changing to the situation as it currently sits and has been approved by the board. I think the information that came today shows in more detail than what we had in our packet that connection fees in Carson are not overly expensive compared with the areas around us. And so I do think that looking at connection fees may be something to be considered if we're going to be looking at rates in any other way or other kinds of potential increases with regard to water sewer connection or regular rates.
Any other comments? Mr. Bennett?
I echo Bruce's view that, right now, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But one of the questions that I do have is, there was a lot of effort that went into identifying what that connection fee needed to be, the $3,400 or so. Do you know, Darren, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, did we take into account the value of the water rights that go into the connection fee as well, or is it just simply buy into the system?
We did not take into account the value of the water rights that were already purchased by the fund. I remember that was something that was specifically asked and discussed, and there's two schools of thought, but for the study that we did to generate these, we did not, it's not included, no.
Just as we move forward, and again, I agree with Bruce, it is something that we need to think about in the next few years. It was a value that was purchased by the citizens of Carson at the time. It's a value that all of the ratepayers receive, I guess, for lack of a better term, and that future connections to the system would take part in as well. So we should include that value in that connection fee.
Right, I think Dorothy Timian Palmer spoke to that at the time that we were discussing the amounts of money needed in the hookup fees and so forth. Okay, any other comments on this subject or questions?
Should I keep going? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Very good. All right, so the next slide then is we're talking about the sewer connection charge. Very similar discussion as to what we had earlier. We have the first bullet is where we are currently, or the first column is where Carson City currently charges as of July 1 of this year. And then in your packet that was published, the remaining columns are what we gave in the presentation 3 years ago. The late material that Eddie helped provide shows as of this week what surrounding municipalities are charging for sewer connection fees. So a lot more detail and a lot broader range in terms of municipalities. As was stated earlier, we're currently the cheapest by $74 as we stand now, and then when in the future, in 2 more years, there will be potentially 2 that are below us, whether or not they raise their rates. But by far, the columns to the right, everybody will be higher than us.
I note that Douglas County, the Board of Commissioners there just decided to lower their building permit amount because it was higher than Carson City's.
Yeah, we I don't know, I think we probably work against each other sometimes because we're always comparing, and then nobody wants to be the highest. And so when you're low, you compare yourself because there's no reason to not to be the lowest around, but then somebody's always got to be low. And then, so, but yeah, we do play off of each other, certainly. This next slide then is what we have seen in the connection in terms of revenue that's been generated for the funds for connection fees, starting back in 2014. Just a pretty small little blip there all the way to the left, and then as you go forward, you can see it starting to creep up, and then for 2018. Those are unaudited, what we had at the time of this going together. Like Pam said, we still have numbers coming in for 2018. But as you can see, it's starting to be a force that can be reckoned with and that we can do something with. So it's positive. We're definitely going in the right direction. Really what we need to establish, and I'm excited about Eddie being here as well as we'll have a new wastewater manager, but really putting these connection fees, they're to be used, as was explained when it went in. Connection fees can't be used to hire more staff. They can't be, there's certain things that it's not to be used for. So in terms of a plan and a report as to where these connection fees are being spent, that I would expect that's something that you'll want to hear about, so you can anticipate that in future years when we talk about budgets.
Where is it going now?
Well, so right now we're putting it into capital expenditure funds. So retrofit, refit, refurbish type projects. That's where it's going now. But it's, 2017 was don't get me wrong, substantial money, but in the scheme of the big budget, it wasn't. I can't tell you that here's one project that we did for $175,000 that connection fees paid for. It didn't work like that because there wasn't enough there. But as we go further along and generates more, it will have a direct tie to a specific project or an upgrade or an upsizing that we will be able to report on. So.
Mr. Bennett?
Darren, do you have any recollection as to how 2018 compares to before the recession? Because I recall that the board reduced the connection fees substantially in response to the recession. But are we approaching a high water mark, or we still have a long ways to go to get back to those boom days?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and off the record, I can't tell you exactly, but I do know that in one of the funds, we were getting close to $1 million in fees. So, yeah, we still have a ways to go, but you can't quote me on exactly that number.
Excuse me, and that was it. I remember this very clearly, that before the recession, we were bringing in $1 million in water and sewer hookup fees. Which is why I watch it so closely now.
And Member Spell would be, it's one of the things in the budgets, this is one line item that we always budget low and conservative, and finance budgets it more conservative than we even would. But until the money's in the bank, we're not going to count on it. And if you look at those budget line items, you'll notice that what the number that we put in there for budget compared to what actually comes in, it's always going to be on the positive side, because we don't want to guess the economy wrong or development. So just a little bit of background information on that. That is the last of my slides. The only thing I wanted to add to that was in some of your discussion earlier about the connection fee, where we've been, where we're going. So as you know, in the middle of winter, I'm planning to do a rate refresh for wastewater, water, and stormwater. As part of that, I was not going to look at connection fees because I felt that we are still in our phase-in model, and I think it's probably premature to do that until we at least get phased into what we agreed to initially before we look at it again. But I will add that as part of connection fees, when this went through both to this committee and to the Board of Supervisors, that part of the motion and what was accepted was that at the end of the 5-year phase-in, that there would be a CPI attached to the connection fees, so that those would be adjusted based on consumer price index, some sort of a measure to kind of keep up with inflation. So if we do nothing, we have this 5-year, 2 more year phase in, and then after that, the CPI would continue each year to each one of these connection fees. But like I say, this was not part of the rates that I was going to look at come this winter. It was going to be more of the usage type rate discussion. So take any questions that you might not have already asked.
Yes, Bruce.
I understand, I guess, the situation with regard to, the rate refresh is going to be complex enough as it is, and I hear what you're saying. I do think then, at the very least, we should sort of reinforce the CPI adjustment concept so that we at least are staying even going forward. I would guess that if the rate refresh results in the potential change in rates for water, sewer, or storm drainage, there's going to be plenty of discussion about that without putting into the mix the connection fees. The connection fees at that point would still have another year to run. But I think as we go forward, we may want to visit those connection fees, but perhaps not in conjunction with the rates themselves because of the nature of having everything in what's bound to be a lot of discussion. But I do think that at least keeping it even, a CPI adjustment, a percentage per year or something is going to be extremely helpful. And we obviously will be talking about that in relation to rates as well, but I'm thinking in terms of the connection fees. Maybe I'd have to go back and look and see exactly what our recommendation was and what the board did, but we may want to reinforce that just so there's no question in the next, before the rate refresh actually hits the stages of being in front of this committee or at the public hearing.
Any other comments? I think that's an excellent idea, Bruce. I think that reinforcing with the CPI, but at the same time keeping it flexible enough so that after the 5 years, if they want to raise the rates and change the rates and so forth, of course, do that too. But with we're calling it a rate refresh. Is that what we're?
I don't know if that's the right term, but that's what I came up with.
Good PR. When do you see that taking place, Darren? Could you refresh my memory?
Yes, absolutely. I was going to touch that on my manager's report, but the...
Why don't we move into
Okay.
your manager's
Okay,
report?
very good, very good.
Thank you, Nancy, for visiting us.
Okay, so agenda item 2D is for information only, manager's report, and this was just to give you some background information on a few things that we're working on. I'll start off with personnel. I introduced our new water manager that's been with us for a month.
Could we get a spelling on that last name, please?
I should probably take this. Just wanted to say I'm happy to be here and really enjoying my time already with Carson City and look forward to working with you all. I'll get to the spelling. It's Quaglieri. I hear the G is silent, but pronounce it however you want.
Well, how do you pronounce it?
I pronounce it Quaglieri.
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 All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. So yes, you'll be hearing from Eddie in the future a lot more than me, so I'm looking forward to that. We also had success on the wastewater side. As you remember, one of the goals that we had was to split the utility and run them separately. So we have hired a wastewater utility manager as well. Rick Fiera is his name, and he is coming to us from the Placerville area, just over the mountain slightly. Anyway, his first day is the Tuesday after Labor Day, which I believe is the 4th, perhaps, of September. And so he couldn't obviously make this meeting, but the next meeting we'll have him here. We're very excited. He brings us a broad background as well and has some great ideas in terms of wastewater. The remaining, I presented to you earlier on, I think in February, in terms of staffing within the department, the reorganization, trying to bring some help in. So that's in full phase-in mode as of July 1. Most of those pieces, as I've talked about, the critical ones have taken place. And so we're doing some of the backfill positions that were vacated or moved around. So we're still in a little bit of a state of flux over there, but from everything that we've noticed and we've heard, it's going to work out well. So I'm pleased with the direction and all of the feedback that you provided, as well as the Board of Supervisors, and it's going in the right direction. So the future looks bright in terms of staffing. I don't take it lightly, especially times like this. Is with the economy as it is, it's tough to find engineers, but I truly believe that we found two that are just excellent and really going to do a good job for this city. So you'll be in good hands. The next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was projects. We touched on the east-west transmission main. So if you'll remember, there's one more segment of that from Phillips, just on the west side of Carson Street, all the way up to our Quill Water Treatment Plant. So with the refunding and the new funding, that project is a go. So we anticipate, we're currently working on the design. It's an in-house design for that project, and we anticipate putting that out to bid in February of 2019 with a construction start date of April of 2019. The goal will be to complete that project next year in the construction season. Half of it is along the Washington alignment going up to the west, so it will directly impact the public, some extensively, and then the remaining is through open space and trails, and then into city utility land up by Quill. In terms of the design, so far we haven't hit any snafus. It's going well, and we anticipate that being the schedule for that project. That's definitely going to be the big project on the wastewater side of things, or on the water side of things. What else is happening is water is new budget season, so new money on capital side of things. As you'll remember, in our capital plan, we had money set away for redrilling a well. We had money set aside for minor projects. So those are all in the hopper in terms of being designed to go forward to get constructed this fiscal year. On the wastewater side of things, we are starting the sewer project, collection project that we have in the south end of town on Clear Creek. If you remember, we did the first half, which was coming almost from 395 Carson Street going east, and we brought it to Center Drive. This is the second phase, so it goes from Center Drive and it will go down to Snyder, that area. The goal, why that's such an important project, is once that main gets built, we will be able to turn off the main, which is a 6-inch line that runs parallel to Clear Creek, the actual creek. And everybody knows you don't want a sewer line right next to the creek. So that is going to be an excellent day when we can block that sewer line off and no longer have it so close to the creek. So that project is starting the Tuesday after Labor Day. Construction is starting. They already had their pre-construction meeting, and they anticipate having that done this calendar year, with paving still being done this fall. Also part of that project that goes across tribal land, we are rebuilding that road there. I don't know if anybody travels down there, but it's a very rough road. So part of this, there wasn't much asphalt to remain once we put our trench through there. So we're rebuilding that road. So we're doing some goodwill for the tribe, and they're happy with the project to date. Also, we have down at our water resource recovery facility, phase 1, we have not completely closed out. Mostly we're just working on paperwork, a couple of really small punch list items that they can't seem to do, and then just the owner's manual and documents needed to close out a project. So that one's still hanging out there. Meanwhile, phase 2 has started. It's well underway. If you go out in that area, you'll see the site there's a lot of equipment working around. KG Walters was the successful contractor for that. As you'll remember, they did phase 1, so they're also doing phase 2. And that project currently is scheduled to be complete at the end of next calendar year, 2019. So that's a high level of projects that we have going in those two funds. There's always the smaller projects ongoing that are capitally funded. Then I was just going to touch base a little bit on the planning side of things. So as I alluded to earlier, I'm looking at a rate refresh for the utility funds. The specific one that's going to be more than a refresh is the stormwater rate. And as you'll remember, over the last 18 months, we brought forward several proposals for stormwater, and ultimately the Board of Supervisors gave us direction that they wanted to start at ground zero and relook at how rates are charged and how much they are. So that will be a big portion of this rate study that will be going on. The rate refresh part is on the water and the wastewater side of the funds. I would like, my goal is, this was done 7 years ago. We're through the 5-year phase in. What I think it's prudent that we put on the record what the assumptions were, what our anticipations were, some of our variables that we had in that. Bring that all forward and say, this is what we thought it would be, this is what it is, this is what's working, this is what's not working. That's the idea behind a refresh. I am not doing this because my goal is to bring before you that we need to raise rates. That's not the goal at all. It's just, a lot has changed in 7 years across all boundaries. So that's the goal of the rate refresh. The schedule of that, the idea was to put out the RFP in October of this year, make a selection of a firm by the end of this calendar year, and then the study, the actual work start in the beginning January timeframe of next year, and that would go on several months, and hopefully by sometime in spring, early summer, we would be done and ready to start our public discussion. I know the stormwater side of things for a fact that there's going to be some changes there, specifically because they wanted us to look at the whole rate. In terms of water and wastewater, in terms of a refresh, I don't know what yet will be brought before this body or the Board of Supervisors in terms of what comes out of there, but all the information that we gather from there will be presented, and you'll know if we went in the right direction 7 years ago or not. That's the anticipation with the rate study. The other planning efforts, specifically to the funds, so one of the advantages of having managers now specifically for water, one for wastewater, is to start looking at these higher level future planning, future production. How are we going to get the water we need as we continue to grow, and how are we going to dispose of the water that we create as we continue to grow? We've done a lot of studies around the edges. The goal for these new managers is to take all of that, digest it, put it all in one, and we're going to develop a plan as to what the future looks like for Carson City, both for water and for wastewater. So that is front and center in one of the things that they'll be working on, and then providing updates to this board when the timing is right. That on the water side, that has to do with where are we going to get additional water? Is it treatment? Is it storage? Everything's on the table, and Eddie is very good at being able to look at all of that, and he'll bring that stuff forward. And then wastewater, the disposal issue in terms of we are sort of wrapping up this year in terms of effluent and use for irrigation. And at this time, we do not anticipate need to doing any augmentation with potable water, which is what we thought at the beginning of the year. Even though it's been the hottest July on record, we were able to store enough, thankfully a wet winter, we were able to store enough to where we won't have to do that. It won't be long, and we're going to start projecting looking into next year as to, depending on how low Brunswick gets and what it looks like for next year. So that's definitely on our radar in terms of planning for future years. I think that's a summation of my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or any concerns you guys have.
Thank you, Darren. That was excellent. So, are there any questions? On the water refresh, I like that. I think that I think in general, one of government's faults is that they don't go back and do review. Businesses always do. They always go back and look and see, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, where can we make it better, where, so forth. Government doesn't always do that, and I think that's an excellent idea. I really do. I think that's quite good. So, any other comments from everybody? All right, let's then talk about our next meeting. Did we have another one planned for this year?
I think we're set for November 27th.
Okay, good.
November 27th at 1 PM is what's on the calendar.
All right. Does anyone have any suggestions as to what they would like to see on that agenda?
One thing, if I may, Chair, is we will, at that point, we will be able to bring back to you the budget in terms of fiscal 18 will have been, so that's usually when we cover that. So fiscal 18 will have been closed, and we can bring all exact numbers to that meeting. So we typically hit that one, but additional items.
And you'd be able to give us an update on the refresh as far as responses to the RFP,
That's
that
correct.
kind of thing?
That's correct, yes,
and so forth?
yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I just going to say, I like the format of today. Having the audited numbers, having the director's report on projects and personnel and so on is very helpful. So I like this format.
All right, he likes this format. We're going to keep it. Anybody have any objections to this format? I don't think so. So that's great. All right. If there are no other comments, I would entertain a motion to, wait a minute. One of the things I think I want on that agenda too, just to give everybody a heads up, I'd like for us to do a little review of us, okay, at this meeting. I think there's going to be some changes in the next year and so forth. So I'd like this committee to talk a little bit about what this committee does. Should it do some more? Should it do some less? That kind of thing as we move forward. We're going into the 5th year, and so I think it's time that we review us. So, any other comments? I will entertain a motion to adjourn. But first we have to have public comment. So, and seeing as there's nobody else here, we're not going to have public comment, clearly. There's no public to make comment. So now I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Actually, I